Chapter 3 Slaughter at Athol Turallion. It was not long before companies of archers lined the outer wall, and after a few shambolic attacks, the orcs soon learned that to approach within 100 paces was to face certain death. The greenskins tried as best they could to redirect the fall of their catapult shots, but scored only one lucky hit against the rampart, while the rest of their fire landed well short or flew over the city into the harbour beyond. Malekith arrayed his spearmen by companies near the westernmost of the three gates, and commanded his captains to drive forwards into the enemy. With a fanfare of clarions, the gates were opened, and the host of Naggareth marched forth. At the orders of their commanders, the Naggarothi stepped out in unison, filling through the gate 5 abreast, their spear tips shining in the light of the orcs' fires. A wall of black shields went before them, and against this barrier the wild arrow shots of the orcs never found a mark. The vanguard halted some 50 paces from the gateway as the orcs began to gather into rude mobs, clamouring about their haggard standards, the largest of their kind bullying, bellowing and punching their underlings into a rough semblance of order. The main part of the elven column parted to the left and right, and took up position in sloping echelons beside the vanguard to form an unbroken wall of spear points that ran from the northeast to the southwest, one flank guarded by the wall, the other by the sea. Behind them, half of the archers ran swiftly down from the walls and took up position from which they could shoot over the heads of their kinsmen. Malekith watched this from the gatehouse, Lorhir and a few other worthy citizens of the prince's new realm beside him. "We still have a company or more of warriors, and we would not have it said that we did not fight for the future of our city," said Lorhir. "I do not doubt your gallantry," said Malekith, "but watch, and you will see why no elf may stand in the line of Naggareth without first passing 100 years training upon the fields of Anlec." The prince signalled to a hornblower, stood with the group, and the herald raised his instrument and played out 3 rising notes. Almost instantly, the battle line of the elves shifted position. With seamless precision, the companies on the right nearest the wall turned and marched northwards, each angled to protect the flank of the company in front. Through the gap this created came the archers, who spread out into a long line 3 deep. The shouted commands of their captain still ringing from the wall, the archers let loose a single storm of arrows that sailed high into the air as a dark cloud. The shots fell steeply into the gathering orcs, slaying and wounding hundreds in a single devastating volley. No sooner had the first salvo hit its mark than another was in the air, and 8 more times this was repeated, an unending stream of arrowheads that pierced armour and green flesh and left piles of orcish dead littering the forest and road. Many of the orcs fled from this ceaseless death, but the largest and fiercest were goaded into action and ran towards the elven line, chanting and screaming. As they approached, their charge gathered more momentum, and those orcs that were fleeing turned back and rejoined the attack, bolstered by the headlong assault of their betters. When the green horde was no more than 100 paces from the elves, the archers let loose a flurry of shots into their ranks, but the onslaught did not cease or even pause. Malekith gave another signal to his musician, and the hornblower let out a long pealing blast that dipped in pitch. The orcs were no more than 50 paces away, but the lightly armed archers seemed unperturbed. They split their line, every second archer stepping to his right. Through these channels the spearmen swiftly advanced, and then reformed, scant moments before the orcish attack hit. With a crash that could be heard upon the walls, the orcs hurled themselves at the Naggarothi spear. The spears pierced green hide, and heavy blade cut through shaft and shield, as the orcs tried to batter their way through the line with brute strength and impetus. Here and there, elves fell to the sheer ferocity of the assault, but other elves quickly stepped forward and closed these gaps, leaving no path through the shield barrier. All along the line, spears were drawn back and thrust forward in a rhythmic pulse, undulating from south to north in a wave that left hundreds of orcish dead. Against the weight of the orcs' numbers, the elves slowly began to give ground, steadily and calmly taking steps backwards towards the wall as the fighting slowed and then renewed. It was then that Lorhir realised what was happening. "You're drawing them closer to the walls," he said in amazement. Excuse me. "Now see the true strength of the Nagarothi host," Malekith told his companions. 2 short horn blasts followed by a long piercing note then rang out, and the archers still upon the walls moved to the battlements. From here they could fire directly into the orc mass, their shots passing no more than a hand's breadth from their comrades, yet loosed with such accuracy that the Nagarothi were never in danger of hitting their own warriors. Between the spear points and arrows of the Nagarothi host, the orcs' enthusiasm for fighting began to waver. Their leaders bellowed and beat those that turned away from the melee, and took up great swords and axes, and hewed at the elves as a tree cutter might hack at a log. Encouraged by the spirit of the orcish chieftains, the Green Horde kept fighting. The crews of the catapults now tried to direct their fire upon the spearmen, and scored a few hits that opened up holes in the elvish line. However, the archers poured arrows into these breaches to hold back the orcs, while the spearmen reformed again and again to keep the company steady. Boulders and flaming balls of tar-covered wood fell more upon the orcs than the elves, to the perverse delight of the war engine's crews. It seemed that they cared not who died beneath the crushing shots of their engines. Now, the greater part of the besieging army had been drawn forwards onto the spears of the elves, and Malekith enacted the final part of his strategy. Another signal from the horn, and the northern gate opened, allowing the knights of Nagaryth to ride forth. Pennons streamed from their lance tips, and silver and black gonfalons fluttered from a dozen standard poles as the 1,000 knights charged the greenskins. With the war cries of Nagaryth upon their lips, and the horn blast of their musicians ringing around them, the knights of Anlec carved a swathe into the flank of the army, pressed up against the elven line. The orcs were defenceless against the manoeuvre, unable to turn to face this new threat without exposing themselves to the spears of the infantry, spitted upon lances and trampled beneath the hooves of the knights' steeds. Hundreds of orcs died in the first impact of the charge. The momentum of the knights carried them forward into the midst of the orcish host, and the infantry pressed forwards again to ensure that the noble cavalry would not be surrounded. Lorhir gave a cry of dismay and pointed eastwards. Not all of the orcs had yet joined the fray, and a group of several hundred now marched swiftly from the far end of the wall. They sprinted eagerly towards the battle, and would come up behind the knights, or could otherwise turn through the open gate of the city. "We must intercept them," said Lorhir, turning to run towards the steps, but Malekith grabbed him by the arm and halted him. "I said that you are not yet part of the Nagarothi army," the prince said sternly. "But you have no other reserve," cried Lorhir. "Archers alone will not deter them. Who else will hold them back?" "I will," said Malekith. "If each of my warriors is worth 5 of yours, then I am worth at least 100. With that, Malekith turned and sprinted eastwards along the wall. As he ran, he began to chant quickly under his breath, drawing the winds of magic towards himself. He could feel them churning in the air around him, heaving through the stone beneath his booted feet. Though not as dense as the magic condensed by the vortex in Ulthuan, the strands of mystical energy that swirled across the whole world blew strongly here in the northern parts. Malekith was filled with exhilaration as his sorcery grew in power. suffusing his body with its boundless energy. With a shout, Malekith drew his sword and bounded up to the rampart before leaping from the wall. Silver wings of magic sprang shimmering from his shoulders and carried the prince aloft. As he sped swiftly towards the orc reinforcements, Malekith's sword glowed with magical power, a piercing blue light burning from its blade. The light spread until it enveloped the whole of the prince, so that he became a gleaming thunderbolt of energy. The orcs stumbled and gazed upwards in amazement and awe as Malekith sped down towards them, one fist held in front of him. His sword swept back, ready to strike. Like a meteor, the Prince of Naggareth crashed into the orcs in an explosion of blue flame that sent burning greenskins and steaming earth flying for many yards in every direction. Dozens more were hurled from their feet as magical flames licked at their flesh. Smoke drifted up from the crater, revealing the prince crouched on one knee. With another shout, he sprang forward, sword in front of him like a lance point, and the blade slid through the chest of the nearest greenskin. More out of instinct and natural savagery than bravery, the closest orcs charged towards the prince, their weapons upraised, guttural shouts tearing the air. The prince moved in a blur of speed and motion, slicing and thrusting with his gleaming blade, felling an orc with every heartbeat. Within a few moments, all but one of the orcs were running from the wrath of Malekith. The creature that remained was a gigantic beast, almost twice as tall as the elven prince. It was clad from head to toe in thick plates of armour painted with dried blood. It regarded Malekith with small brutish red eyes and flexed its clawed fingers on the haft of the great double-headed axe it carried. With a grunt, it hefted the axe above its head and swung down the blade with terrifying force. Malekith stepped nimbly aside at the last moment, and the axe bit deep into the ground. Where a moment before the prince had been stood, his sword held idly by his side, Malekith took a few steps to his right as the orc warlord ripped its axe free from the earth in a shower of bloody clods. With a bellow of anger, the orc swung its axe two-handed, but Malekith easily ducked the wild blow and cut his sword across the shoulder of the warlord, sending shards of armour spinning away. As the orc recovered its balance, the Lord of Naggareth spun around behind it and slashed at its legs, drawing his blade across both thighs, hamstringing the monstrous greenskin. Falling to its knees, it gave a roar of rage and lunged wildly towards the prince, who stepped backwards as the orc fell flat upon its face. With a deft thrust, Malekith sheared his blade through the exposed shoulder of the orc, and then brought the edge of the blade down upon the wrist of the other arm. The orc howled as its axe fell to the ground, one fist still gripped around its rough wooden haft. Malekith paced back and forth, eyeing the orc with a contemptuous smile. Helpless now, the orc could do nothing but shout and froth at the mouth. With a flourish, Malekith whipped his sword around for a final time, and the orc's head spun into the air with a fountain of blood. It fell to the hard earth at Malekith's feet in a spatter of gore. The prince dug the point of his gleaming blade into the still helmeted skull and lifted it from the ground for all to see. The remnants of the orcs were fleeing through the woods, abandoning their war machines, and a great roar of triumph rose up from the ranks of the Naggarothi. Thrice they shouted the name of their prince, each time lifting up their spears and bows and lances in salute. As the knights made sport of chasing the fleeing greenskins through the forest, Malekith returned to his city. When news reached Ulthuan of Malekith's actions, there was much debate and confusion. Prince Anaron travelled to Toran Rock with many allies and demanded audience with the Phoenix King. The benches around the throne chamber were thronged with nobles and courtiers, and the air throbbed with heated discussion. A respectful hush fell upon the entry of the Phoenix King, who paced from the great double doors, his long cloak of feathers sweeping across the marble floor. As soon as Belshazzar was seated upon his throne, Anaron stepped forwards and gave a perfunctory bow. "Malekith must be punished," Anaron rasped. "Punished for what crime?" Belshazzar asked calmly. "He has seized my lands, sovereign territory of Etain," Anaron said. "The city of Athol Turalian was founded by my father and passed to me. This Nagarothi villain has no rightful claim." "If you allow Malekith to keep his stolen prize, you set a terrifying precedent," added Galderan, one of the lesser Etain princes. "If we can seize each other's lands and claim right of conquest, then what is to prevent us all from doing as we pleased? Only Nagaroth and Calador with their large armies are served in this manner. You must end this before it begins." There were boos and scoffing cries from some amongst the court, and cries of encouragement from others. The tumult continued for some time, until Belshazzar raised his hand, and silence once again descended. "Are there any that speak on behalf of Malekith?" asked the Phoenix King. There was a gentle cough, and all eyes turned to the uppermost tier of benches to the Phoenix King's left. Morothai sat amidst a small entourage of grim Nagarothi. She stood languidly and paced slowly down the steps to the floor of the audience hall, her gown billowing behind her like golden dawn clouds. "I speak not for Malekith, nor Nagaroth," the seeress said, her voice gentle yet strong. "I speak for the people of Athol Turalian, left to die in their homes at the hands of the savage orcs by Prince Anaron." "There was not room," began Anaron. "Be silent," snarled Morothai, and the Etain prince stuttered into acquiescence. "It is not your place to interrupt your betters when they are speaking." Prince Anaron and the realm of Etain forfeited all right to Athol Turalian when they abandoned their duties to protect their citizens. Morothai had been speaking to Belshazzar, but now turned to address the chamber as a whole. "Prince Malekith usurped no throne," she declared. "No blade was lifted against the warriors of Etain. No blood of fellow elves spilt. The Lord of Nagaroth conquered on an abandoned city in the grip of the orcs. He saved hundreds of elven lives by his actions. That those lands had once belonged to Prince Anaron is of no bearing. If we are to argue ownership in that manner, then perhaps we should ask a representative of the orcs to attend, for they lived there long before we arrived." Laughter rippled around the hall at Morothai's suggestion, for Ulthuan had been awash for years with tales of the orcs' brutality and stupidity. The former queen of Ulthuan turned her attention back to the Phoenix King. "No wrong has been done here," she said. "Malekith asks not for reward nor praise, but the simple right to keep what he has fought to claim. Would you deny him that right?" A greater part of the assembled nobles applauded Morothai's argument. Belshazzar considered his position. A large number of Ulthuan's citizenry even now lauded the prince and his heroic defence of the colony city. Prince Anaron had never enjoyed much popularity, even amongst the elves of Etain, and many enjoyed the snub implicit in Malekith's annexation. The Phoenix King had heard jeers from a large crowd of elves outside the palace during the arrival of Anaron in Toran Rock. I have here one other piece of evidence," Morothai added. She gestured to her retainers, and one strode down from the benches and passed her a rolled-up parchment. Morothai handed this to Belshazzar, who did not open it, but merely looked inquiringly at the Nagarothi seeress. "This is a letter from the people of Athol Turalian," she said. "It is signed by all 476 survivors of the Orc attack. They swear loyalty unconditionally to Prince Malekith. Further, they invite their kith and kin to join them in the new lands and are confident that under Nagarothi protection, the city will prosper greatly. So do not simply listen to my opinion, but hearkened to the views of the city's people. At this there were some cheers from the watching courtiers and princes. Anaron scowled as even some of his fellow attainers joined in the mockery. "It appears that a precedent is indeed set," said Belshazzar, when the clamour had quietened. "A prince who quits his property and leaves it unprotected abandons all rights to ownership. We were raised to our station for protecting Ulthuan alongside Anarion, and we must maintain our rule as guardians of her people. Thus I make this proclamation. Prince Anaron deserted his lands and his subjects. As Phoenix King, I consider Athol Terralion to have been an abandoned land, and thus suitable for reconquest by any prince. Prince Malekith has established his rightful claim, and that shall be recognised by this court. Let this be a warning to all who seek the riches and power available for those in the New World. Go forth in the name of Ulthuan, but never forget your duties." Thus was Prince Anaron shamed. With little support for his position, the Etain prince sheepishly quit the shores of Ulthuan and sailed west to the jungle-crowded coasts of Lustria. Malekith was invested as ruler of Athol Terralion, and his conquest of the colonies began in earnest.